Well, our program today is native plants and fire. Everything we think we know is wrong. And it will be presented by Greg Rubin. He's a design build landscape contractor from Southern California and has had over 30 years experience in the business. He had 25 of his projects in fires, and not one of them uh, just was they all survived well. He was part of a grant from the U.S. Navy for 4 years, studying scientific research on fire-resistant properties of properly designed native plant landscapes. And he had very positive results. So without further ado, I turn this over to Greg.
Well, thanks, Linda, and hi, everybody. I'm really tickled by the turnout for this thing, and I'll try to make it worth your while. Um, Let me go ahead and share my screen. And let's get this thing up and running. Oops, the wrong, that's at the end. Let's start at the beginning. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Awesome, let's go. So, yeah, we were trying to think of a catchy title, and I thought, well, not only is this catchy, it's true. So, yeah, and I appreciate some of the folks that have actually seen my presentations before, because you know, guys, the conventional wisdom on this stuff is almost the opposite of what we should be doing. And I'm just going to skip over this since you gave me such a nice introduction. I appreciate that very much. A couple of books out there. All right, let's start here. So one of the things that I want people to take away from this is looking at this photo from Altadena. What jumps out at you? We have all these destroyed structures, but look at the vegetation. It's green. So one of the things I want to try to get through to people is that, one, there's an overemphasis on vegetation, whereas home hardening has been incredibly effective. And you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with a lot of the principles. I'll just have a little review on that later on. But the other part of that perspective is that vegetation may actually help save homes. And I'll back that up with reasoning and photos. And the problem is that the conventional wisdom is just the opposite. It's like, remove all the vegetation from your house. Well, I can tell you, once a fire gets into a neighborhood like this, it has very little to do with the vegetation. It goes house to house to house, and the individual vulnerabilities with those houses. And unfortunately, a lot of these homes in Altadena were built so long ago, long before our fire codes and, you know, fire resistant construction techniques. And it's just a horror show. And I'm sorry about that. So let's see how we can do it better. So number one, fire resiliency functions from the house outward rather than the landscape inward. That's a really important concept because it does go to home hardening and architectural design. Another basic precept is that live fuel moisture content, LFMC, has always been the indicator of the severity of the fire season to come and its end. So that is our measure. That is our measure of flammability. So LFMC supports the idea that vegetative flammability is a function of hydration over plant selection, with a few exceptions. Junipers are pretty bad, very close to the house, and then Mexican fan palms. I can tell you in our San Diego fires, when they got into suburbia, the Mexican fan palms are absolutely the worst actors. As fronds detached and became 4-foot flaming frisbees flying at 40 miles an hour, and they were literally lighting up everything, cars, homes, even ones that have been trimmed. If they had what we call the petioles, the base of the branches still attached to the trunk, those would go up in flames. And then also up in the crown there too, where there's a lot of flower stalks and old dates and things like that, and accumulated debris, that burns. And these things spit out embers. If you have the time to look on YouTube at some of these videos, it's extraordinary. And so Mexican fan palms are definitely a real problem in suburban, urban environments. So if it's all about hydration for the most part, there's a corollary that the drought-tolerant native plants require relatively minimal supplemental watering to achieve effective levels of hydration, effective levels of live fuel moisture content. Plus, then there's just a ton of other benefits associated with native plants. This next one is huge because I think it is the underlying misconception that drives a lot of the decisions being made out there. These fires, these catastrophic fires, are without exception wind-driven, not fuel-driven. They're fuel-driven. You can usually get around and do backfires, set up a defensible perimeter and put the thing out. Wind-driven, well, you saw, you're looking at it. Agencies and ordinances advocating brush clearance, quote unquote, may actually be contributing to far more vulnerability. What is going to stand in the way? What is going to protect your house? Well, I can tell you that homes make great ember catchers. And yeah, I used to be an aerospace engineer. I'm a pilot. And especially it was after the Witch Creek fires, 2007. It became readily apparent that research aren't investigating the significant aerodynamics and thermodynamics of wind-driven fire. Okay, so unless you accept the basic assumption that these are wind-driven, then nothing falls in place. But if you look at them from a wind-driven standpoint, now we got to see how vegetation and even homes affect those ferocious flows of embers, okay, that are coming in at 60, 80 miles an hour, as thick as the Fire Falls of Yosemite going sideways, I always say. And again, if there's no vegetation, there's nothing to protect your home. Yeah. So yeah, since everyone's so focused on vegetation is simply fuel, the potential benefit of hydrated plants of various configurations as ember catchers, ember coolers, and as turbulators, disturbing the flow of embers, is ignored. This is another one, especially for you Northern California people. I'm trying to prevent this from happening down south here. So when I do native landscapes, most of our plants are chaparral, shrubland communities, woodland communities, and they want organic mulches. And by far the very best organic mulch that closely emulates the natural duff layer that forms in natural shrubland communities is shredded redwood bark, also known as gorilla hair. Gorilla hair significantly improves the hydration, the health of a native landscape, in addition to very effectively inhibiting weed growth, which would otherwise be flashy fuel fire ladders. I'll tell you why this is. The mulch over time, actually fairly shortly, with the kind of irrigation we like to use, gets matted down, goes from 3 to 4 inches thick down to less than an inch thick. And it's very dense, it adheres to the soil, and it's poorly oxygenated. And at that point, and I've got documentation to support this, it smolders basically with a 2-inch or less flame height, typically. Okay. The problem is all the testing they've done is with fluffed up mulch. Well, we'll talk about in a minute, but I was extremely alarmed, having been through so many fire events, to see them pushing this. Again, fuel, 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 not looking at wind-driven embers. Here's a good one for you guys. According to scientific research, there's no additional structure protection provided by clearing beyond 100 feet, even on steep slopes, and the most important treatment zone is from 16 to 58 feet. And this was a paper published in 2012. I mean, this information's been out there by John Keeley and Alex Seifert. Okay, well, John is probably one of the foremost fire ecologists in the world, and Alex is a really important fire researcher and often does a lot of the data analysis and that. And these guys have done some meta studies that will blow you away. Complete clearance around homes results in total exposure to wind-driven ember attack without perturbance. And clearing of surrounding native vegetation allows for colonization by annual flashy fuel weeds, what we call type conversion, basically weedy cow pasture, soil desiccation, complete loss of habitat, increased erosion, plain loss of regional identity, and unhindered exposure to wind-driven fire. Okay. So what do I mean about vegetation potentially helping to save homes? Well, here we are in Palisades. I took this from a magazine article, so the resolution isn't great, but you get the idea. So here's a green hedge. Frankly, it's in zone 0, within 5 feet of the home, hydrated in green. Okay. And here comes the fire, and this is the result. So that was the direction of the fire spread, the wind. You notice the neighbor, unfortunately, did not do too well. And you can see that it clearly hit the hedge on the upwind side, still green on the house side, and the house is intact. Okay, we've seen this over and over. I've been talking about this for 25 years, no, 28 years, okay? And we're just, you know, we're finally, I think, making some inroads, because this, I don't know if you guys caught it, it was an LA Times article that came out about a week and a half ago by 2 fire scientists who are coming to the same conclusions independently of our studies and what we're saying. So that's why I think you're starting to get a circle of consensus around some of this stuff. And now we're just trying to get the word out. So there's actually basic misconceptions about even fire ecology. Okay. Because how often have you guys heard that chaparral needs to burn? The only way it stays healthy is for it to burn, right? So I don't know what's causing all this pyromania, but I will tell you that if you burn chaparral, like behind me, it's been treated. If you burn chaparral a couple times in 10 years, you've lost it. It's gone, only to be replaced by weeds. And studies of, historical layers of ash show that prior to human habitation, okay, because humans have been here maybe 20, 25,000 years, but, chaparral evolved millions of years ago with its all natural ecology. The actually historic fire cycle was once at minimum every 30 years, more like around 100 to 150 years. Okay. And people would shake their heads and be surprising, but look at what your natural ignition sources when you take humans out of the equation when all this was developing and evolving, right? Lightning, lightning, lightning. Did anybody say lightning? Okay. I got one more. Volcanoes. And how often do you have lightning storms during Santa Ana wind events? Okay. So the vast, vast majority are human caused. In fact, another study that John and Alex did, 97 to 100% for all Southern California counties from 1919 to 2016, and it still holds true, were human caused. Okay. I looked at a fire map of where I'm at in Escondido, stretching back to like 1910. Lots and lots of overlaid fires. Not a single one had a natural cause. They were all human cause. So now that fire cycle is like every 5 to 10 years, and you see the horrible degradation. Okay. The bottom line is chaparral needs to burn like your home needs to burn because you have fire insurance. It doesn't need to burn. It has adaptations, but they were to very catastrophic but highly infrequent mega fire events that wouldn't stop till they hit the ocean. But then they had plenty of time to recover and go through ecological succession. And that was their recovery mechanism. So here's some human ignition sources, right? So arson, yeah, a lot of sick people running around. Electrical fire, this is a big one, guys. I did a lot of the survey work for San Diego Gas and Electric after the 2007 fire. Many of those fires were caused, unfortunately, by their equipment arcing. And we estimate we lost between 10,000 and 100,000 rare and endangered Engelmann oaks down here. It was horrible. Smoking, hopefully this is becoming less of an issue. Trash burning. Yeah, like the Pumashaw fire that burned down half of Palomar Mountain was started by a man who decided to burn his trash in the middle of a Santa Ana. Cars, this is also a big one. Bad catalytic converters spitting out their guts or people dragging chains and sparking. Those fires tend to be rather regular along the freeway there. And they're kind of recognizable, or just a plain car fire where they pulled over, catches on fire, and burns up the hill next to it. Children playing with fire, shockingly. The lilac fire down here was a 14-year-old girl running around lighting fires. It was horrific. The wind storm was akin to what they were seeing up in Palisades, and just huge burns up in North County, but fortunately all of our customers survived. And then this. You see what's going on here? This was less than a mile from my office. Ironically, they were doing weed abatement for fire. And folks, when they do this work, have a few 5-gallon buckets of water on the back of the truck, or have a hose nearby, something, right? Because a lot of these have metal blades. That metal blade sparks off a rock and you're off to the races. So, yep, that's a huge one too. So let's talk about planning a little bit. So one of these situations, because people love to have a view, obviously, but they're building too close to the canyon, right? And there's nothing to protect them. These homes were wide open. They did everything right. You can clearly see the bare ground around the structures. Okay, the stuff was cleared. Didn't protect the homes at all right along the edge there. And this is a very dangerous situation. That fire came from the left and where we're standing here to the right towards the homes. And the flames just shot up those hillsides and burned everything along the edge. So we need to think about setbacks. You definitely don't want to be building right at the end of a box canyon. And again, this is where we need to be looking at the aerodynamics of wind-driven fire. And when you have basically smooth laminar flow, how that affects structures that are adjacent. Okay, this is from the Witch Creek fire, and if you look in the middle there, upper middle, you'll see a peninsula. Here, let me zoom in on that. Okay. Almost every home was lost. You had this narrow cul-de-sac out on a peninsula that was surrounded on all sides by fire in this case. Just think about what it was like for these people trying to evacuate on this very narrow road, and you've got fire equipment trying to come in and fight this fire. Yeah, that's why so many homes burned along there. So this is all planning. These are all planning considerations for you planners out there and what they're permitting on these big development projects. And they're pushing out more and more into the natural chaparral too. So we're just coming up against the wildlands everywhere. So here's an example of a green belt around a community. I would not have thinned as much as this, but it shows that it created a defensible perimeter. But I especially want you to notice in the middle left, that stand of oak trees next to that house. Those absolutely saved that house. You can see where the radiant heat scorched the leaves on this side. And on the green side, you have a standing intact home. Okay. Now I like this trail going around there because that provides access. And they left a lot of thinned native vegetation, which again can act as ember deflectors, catchers, and coolers. Okay. This is sort of the concept that I have for communities like Palisades and Altadena, is create these native green belts around the community that have trees and shrubs that are layered in there, maybe no more than groups of 3, but as you're perpendicular to the fire direction, they overlap. These groups go down slope, and they overlap so that head on you have a fire block. And why native? Well, for all the reasons we discussed, plus it is so much less water and maintenance required. When we do these things, I didn't do this, but the concept is to use a lot of evergreen native plants because they hold that hydration best. So manzanita, believe it or not, I've had homes saved by manzanita, oaks, Catalina cherry, toyon, lemonade berry. These are wonderful ember catchers and coolers. And plus it looks beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful. So, when you design these right, they don't go dead, dry, dormant in summertime. That is really kind of a lack of plant knowledge and what to use. And I can tell you, if our landscapes were looking dead half the year, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. So this is just a little review. I'm sure you're all familiar with these concepts about home hardening. And this is what saves homes. This is absolutely what saves homes in fires. Okay, up there in the eaves, right? Up in the eaves there, now we're going towards boxed in eaves, no exposed rafters, or if there are rafters, joists, they're big timbers, okay, that are slow to burn. But in general, we're going towards boxed in eaves, and then the vents are in the bottom of these eaves facing vertically with screens over them. the windows, this is a big one, guys. Some of the fires, you would see that even double pane windows would fall in if they were in vinyl frames. They really need to be metallic frames. Okay, I'm not sure how fiberglass does. That may be an option, but I haven't really tested it or seen it per se. But all of our clients had metal frame, double pane windows, especially in the presumed direction of the fire, which in Southern California, due to Santa Ana's, is usually from the northeast. Okay, so at least on that side of the structure. Of course, your vents, right, all screened. You want embers getting in there. There's a lot of really good products out there now. Obviously, fire resistant roofing. One thing to note on this, and I think it's pretty well standard now, but on your tile roofs, you want to make sure that the ends of those tile runs are plugged so that you don't have nesting in there or debris catching in there and lighting up the subroof. So that's very important. And then most of your composites now are fire rated. And then of course we're pushing more and more into the wildland, right? And you know, and their solution is to just destroy it. I mean, just remove it, leaving them vulnerable, and you're destroying double the habitat than if you're just concentrating on the development itself. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and I'm sorry about that. And I'm hoping we can get the word out to people. So let's talk a little bit about, zones, right? Fire zones. Now, if you lived in Altadena or Palisades, you barely got into zone 1, okay? And the big one that everybody's talking about is zone 0. Okay, that's fairly new. That's usually the first 5 feet. Then you have zone 1 or A, which is usually the next 30 to 50 feet, and they keep pushing it out farther and farther. And zone 2 or B, which is the next 50 to 70 feet or more. Okay, I mean, there's literally, guys, there's insurance companies requiring people to clear 200 to 300 feet around their homes. Well, I'm going to show you some documentation of how that worked out. So zone 0, there's a lot of controversy about this. I'm a believer in it to an extent, but we typically are implementing on new construction. I do have a picture of a retrofit. So new construction, we're not planting vegetation closer than 5 feet, and usually we put an apron around the house. That's either decomposed granite or gravel, nothing. I don't like to use nothing because weeds come in. Or even concrete. You'll see people putting in concrete aprons. And it has been fairly successful for us. Let me turn off my phone. Let's look at what zone 0 can look like. All right. Well, this home was clearly saved from the Witch Creek fire by zone 0. In this case, the concrete apron. The shade structure is metal. This was a hot fire, guys. What you're looking at was their back lawn. The back lawn actually burned. And then if you look on the hillside in the background there, you see a silver streak. That was actually a metal water tank. Unfortunately, the neighbors on both sides, including that one, burned to the ground. And our client here, you can see the scorch marks along the edge of the apron there and no further. There isn't even any scorching on the stucco. So to me, this isn't an example of zone 0 at work. So this is a very early one. We did this one in 2003. It was our first attempt. There was no guidance on this. We just said, well, it makes sense to keep the flames out from under the eaves. So we built this, 2 to 3 foot wide gravel apron around the house. Now, if I was doing this differently, I would just extend that all the way to the path, obviously. And I probably wouldn't be planting manzanitas so close to the house. But having said that, this came through just fine, the Cedar Fire and the Witch Creek Fire. Okay. And it's fine to this day. It was actually one of our study sites for the Navy research that we did. This was probably our first time we ever implemented a decomposed granite apron. This home has been through something like 4 wildland fires. I just learned very recently that in the 2007 Witch Creek fire, which started not far from here, the opposite side of the house, the back corner, did get some damage, and the kitchen got kind of smoked out and had to be redone. But the house itself survived. What was interesting is that on that side of the house, we hadn't done any landscaping. So there wasn't any blocking vegetation there. It was actually where their laundry area was, where they hang their laundry, so it didn't get touched. And that's where it came in, which is kind of interesting. So here, it shows you this, that the zone zeros are not necessarily unattractive. I think this gives a really kind of cool, almost old Western look to it. You can see the native plantings, they're lower growing, they're well spaced, they're irrigated. There's trails and hardscape, the dry stream bed and that. And like I say, it has survived with some damage in one of the events, but basically still standing. And this is a fairly modern installation a few years ago. This is in Harbison Canyon, which is just full of gorgeous chaparral all the way around this property. And again, not unattractive. The tree was pre-existing, so we just cut it away from the house. The siding is hardy board, which is a concrete product. Again, your double pane metal frame windows, boxed in eaves, vertical venting that's screened over, good roofing. So that's what it looks like. Here's a retrofit that we did. This is near me in Escondido, and we put down the DG apron. We actually didn't end up removing any vegetation. I hadn't planted that close to the house, but I can tell you if it, for any reason, fails a fire inspection, we can just easily cut this vegetation back. To be really honest with you guys, I'm not seeing evidence of vegetation like perennials or small subshrubs under, say, 18, 24 inches, really developing enough flame height to burn up the eaves. And so, we left it like this, so we didn't look funky, but yeah, that's an example of a retrofit. Now we move out to zone 1 or A. So this is really critical to defensible space along zone 0. So firemen actually make very conscious decisions when they come into a neighborhood in front of a fire and they say, I can defend that home, I cannot defend that home, because they don't particularly want to die saving your possessions, okay? So we got to give them a place to get in there and access as much as anything and fight the fire. And the homes that they have to do this sort of Sophie's choice on, sometimes they make it, sometimes they not. Sometimes they can fight the fire from the neighbors where there is some access, and they can fight the fire from that location. So I would not want to be in this house in a Santa Ana driven fire. This is what insurance companies are pretty much advocating. They'd love this, right? It's a sitting duck, guys. It is completely exposed. All right. the fact that it may be bare ground, more likely weeds by the time fire season rolls around, is not a protection. Remember, these embers can blow in from over a mile away. I mean, they cross major freeway interchanges, for God's sakes. Okay. So this is not effective at all. In fact, it massively increases the vulnerability. It's destroyed all that habitat. It's going to come back in grasses, mustard, and weeds. It's going to look like hell. And the house is going to be completely vulnerable. This house went through fire. It was a Santa Fe structure, so it just screamed for kind of a desert landscape. A lot of hardscape. In this case, gravel is our mulch because that's what deserts really prefer. And not a lot of exposed, eaves or timber, and did just fine. So this is an important concept in zone 1. All right. Most of your flames, most of the fire front is being moved by spot fires, from embers, unfortunately from burning animals. I hate to say it. And that's what you want to be on top of, as the fire is approaching. Okay. And one of the main things you can do has to do with wood fences. This is what wood fences do in fires. Okay. They burn high and they burn hot. So, remove your piles of wood and debris from directly around the house. Okay. Your firewood, get it away from there. Your wood sheds, get them away from there. The wooden fences can ignite and wick those flames right to a home. And so your best option, at least where the fence turns in to where the side of the house or the garage is, and you have your gates there, is do something non-metallic, something non-flammable, right? They've even got these pretty cool precast concrete panels now, and on the right you can see that that one definitely survived the fire next to the wooden fence that burned. So, this is a really good potential option here in these fire-prone areas. And they're attractive, and they're available in all kinds of patterns and shapes and colors and stuff. So that's one option. Hardy board slat fences, plank fences are another. Use metal posts, not wooden posts, and be creative. Also in zone 1, that's typically where we have our permanently irrigated plantings, and it can be completely native, just like in this example. That's actually what we call a native lawn. It's actually a substitute using a sedge called Carex progressilis. And this is in La Jolla, which is a very ritzy community down here. And I came back expecting to see this beautifully manicured sedge lawn. And this is what confronted me. And I talked to the homeowner. I said, we liked it. We love this look. We love this hummocky, meadowy look. So we just left it the way it was. We're happy with it. I think great. And the landscape itself is also native, but it is irrigated about once every 7 to 10 days in summer with very light overhead irrigation to keep it all hydrated. By the way, you can actually mow these sedge lawns too. They mow just fine. They even smell like freshly cut lawn, but they take half the water and less than half the mowing of a conventional lawn. Okay, now we're getting out into zone 2 or B, which is beyond this yard plantings and extends often into the wildlands. And there's a couple different scenarios out there. One may be modified existing natural vegetation, or if they've gone and bulldozed all this stuff already, it's a good option to be doing lightly irrigated native plantings in those zones for a lot of reasons. So here's managing existing native vegetation if you have it. So you want to remove your non-native weeds and your dead limbs. We call it site hygiene. That is critical. This is what gets replaced when you disturb these sites and remove all the chaparral. And this stuff is ready to burn every August. And it is disgusting. It is desertifying. It's just no habitat, but they think, a lot of people actually think this is what a native landscape is. Well, here's a site that survived this, that was cleared or cleaned. Sorry, not clear. I hate that word. It was cleaned prior to the cedar fire. All the weeds were controlled and taken out of there. The only thing that smoldered was that natural duff layer, which, by the way, is what the redwood emulates in a consolidated condition. This mission manzanita was completely healthy, completely happy, hydrated, looked great, didn't look like any fire was even there. Even you can see even the lichens and moss on the branch is perfectly intact. The only way you'd know a fire came through here was the kind of ashy look of the duff layer, but also the dead wood knot that burned out at the base of the tree. Okay. And we see this over and over again. It's all about site hygiene. Okay. Leave the vegetation, manage it, and control your weeds. Okay. So this is another good concept right here. If you have like trees surrounded by understory vegetation, create a gap between the tops of that understory and the bottom branches of the tree. That's roughly 3 times the height of the understory. So let's say it's 18 inches. 3 times 18 inches is 4.5 feet. That's your gap. And the total limb up would be about 6 feet in that case. All right, that's how that works, and it works. Anyway, fire ladders and crown fires are no joke. So here's how you can thin naturally existing shrubland, and that kind of looks like this. So this might even be a little bit over cleared, okay? But when you remove about 40 to 50% of the canopy, you actually remove about 70% of the fuel volume. And one thing that's really important is that when you grind up these branches and that, you put them right back down the site, because that will discourage weeds and that from coming back into this now opened up shrubland. And you can take it to the next step, right? You can carve out a mature native landscape. You can run lots of paths that double as fire breaks, sitting areas, bird baths, bridges, whatever. It costs 150,000 easy per acre to landscape like this. Why not work with the free landscape you have and just clean it up, thin it out a bit, run paths, and you have instant mature, beautiful habitat landscape that, is really fun to be out in. And here's another example, okay? This is actually Cal Fire loved this, by the way, when they saw it. This is what 50% thinning looks like. It's a beautiful native park. We've limbed up in this case, the manzanitas and oaks. We've removed the dead wood, and we left ourselves a beautiful private preserve. Again, the chips go back down to help with the weed control. All right. And I know Dr. John Keeley did a study on thinning, and you don't want to thin any more than 40 to 50%. Any higher, and it becomes counterproductive, and you start to lose all your ember catching and blocking. So now let's talk about the scenario where they bulldoze it. Now you want to plant it back. And in our case, we're going to plant it back with lightly irrigated native plants. This is by far our favorite way to irrigate native plants. This is the MP rotator system. It's made by Hunter. I do not work for Hunter. I get nothing from them But I can tell you, it is by far our favorite system, and it has performed amazingly on a lot of properties. And basically what natives want is native ecology, and we give them natural rainfall. Now, sometimes drip is unavoidable, especially for like narrow planters near the house or whatever, that's fine. But in general, especially on these, slopes and zone 2, even zone 1 areas, we like to water them overhead. Don't let anybody tell you you can't overhead water a native plant. That's ridiculous. How does Mother Nature do it? All right. So we're even experimenting with doing light hydration on existing native vegetation around homes. And clearly you can see the difference between the hydrated and non-hydrated vegetation. But the hydrated vegetation, it looks nice. It's not overgrown. It's not all six. In fact, it's nice and hydrated and green, and it's going to do a lot better in a fire situation. Okay, so what is this Navy study we keep referring to? And why the US Navy, right? They're out in the middle of the ocean. But as you realize, they have naval bases, and on these bases are hundreds of thousands of acres of naval housing, all of which are pretty much up against the wildlands. So when they had heard about us and had come to a couple of our presentations, it caught their attention when I'm saying that, you can create a green belt around your communities that uses far less water, far less maintenance, is incredible habitat because they are serious about preserving habitat. Looks beautiful year round. And oh, by the way, it's fire resistant. That gets their attention, right? So most of our current approaches, continue to this day, are anecdotal and not based on experimental design. They're often highly destructive to the environment with inconsistent outcomes. And guys, I got to tell you, there's a lot of prior science out there. People aren't looking at it. There's a lot. And unfortunately, like I said, vegetation is an easy boogeyman, and it's very performative, and it kind of then ends up putting all the onus on the homeowners, right? And yet homes are still burning to the ground. So we were awarded the Ecologically Sustainable Fire Risk Reduction research grant, and I was co-principal investigator with Dr. John Keeley. So the experimental design, the selection criteria for our test homes was one, they had to be located at the wildland-urban interface and survived a major fire event, and include a lightly irrigated native landscape, natural chaparral or coastal sage-grouse thinned according to common prescriptions, which is around 50%. And then, of course, a control of unmodified natural shrubland and vegetation. All right. So this had to exist on all of these sites, and we had quite a few out there, mostly in the Ramona, East County areas. And here are the results. This is a graph. These are graphs of rate of fire spread as a function of slope and wind speed. And the dotted line is the lightly irrigated planted native landscapes, followed not far behind by the thinned natural shrubland areas. This is, by the way, had never been tested before. And then the solid line is the unmodified control. And the relationship is pretty clear. And this relationship remained regardless of slope or wind speed and across vegetation type. The only one that was a little bit weird were the native scrub oaks, which we think in a natural condition actually were able to derive such hydration from the plant community that didn't matter as much, which is very interesting. Okay, here's this dreaded redwood mulch, right? For one thing, it can stick to very steep slopes. But the key is it has to be consolidated by overhead watering. This is critical to fire resistance. The fuels are less oxygenated in that case. And I mean, anything that's oxygenated will burn, including steel wool, if you remember as a kid burning that stuff. I often get the question, what about oak leaf litter? Well, if you have oak leaf litter that's a foot thick, yeah, you can thin it down to 4 to 6 inches, okay? But you're much better off having a healthy, happy, hydrated oak that is weed free because of their natural mulch that forms and in a position to help protect your home. Just like in that photo I showed you with the oak scorched on the fireside, green on the other, and the intact home beyond. Okay, so much better to promote the health of that tree than to take all that leaf litter out, watch that tree immediately start declining, watch all the weeds start to come up in its absence, and really affect the health of the tree and create fire ladders underneath the canopy that allow enough dwell time for this sick tree to ignite. And when oak trees ignite, they usually explode. They build up steam pressure. They're usually hollow. They build up steam pressure and it blows right out the top. Been there, done that. Here's the same landscape and look at the other opposite direction. And 14 months later, so you can see how much growth we've gotten from 1 gallon plants in 14 months. I also want you to notice how consolidated that dreaded redwood bark mulches, okay? And again, I've got documentation of how this actually performed in fires. In fact, here it is. So these are some case histories I'm going to show you. This is in the Cedar Fire in 2003. This is out in Ramona. That is the mulch that smoldered. The plants were scorched, singed, but completely alive. You can see in the background here, these shrubs still have green leaves on them, and not even all the mulch was burned. And I want you to notice those red marker flags right there, because look at this next slide. Okay. So I would not be using this mulch underneath the eaves. Okay. This is long before that was mandated or really considered. We were considering it already. But anyway, the marker flags were all placed prior to the fire. They were marking new plantings. Okay. And the only one that's melted here is the one that got melted, not from the plants or mulch, but from the burning garden hose. Okay, ironically. And if you look over by the pathway here, there's a plastic drain grate, which is not distorted or melted. You can clearly see the height of the flames on here because of the scorch marks on the screed lines and the rocks. It's about 2 inches. Okay. Obviously, this house survived actually intact, and having all those plastic flags everywhere, you couldn't have designed an investigation better. It was serendipity. Here's the back of the home, okay? And in zone 1 there, we see a lot of hardscape. I had plantings under the eaves there, which many of them are still green. They didn't, even scorch the house itself. There was mulch there, which I would not do today. But also look to the right, look at all the unmelted marker flags, okay? And the huge patch of mulch that isn't even burned, okay? That doesn't mean that this house didn't almost ignite, for nothing to do with the landscape. Over on the left corner there where that wagon was, 2 weeks before the fire, there was a cord of firewood. The husband and wife got into a massive argument. They later divorced. Thank God she won that argument. So the husband moved all that firewood out by the propane tank. Next, which survived, by the way. At the back door there, they had wicker furniture. That wicker furniture ignited, 8-foot flames. The next door neighbor actually resisted the evacuation order, saw the flames at the back of the house, got CAL FIRE over there. They knocked down the door. They broke out the drywall on the other side and saved the house. And yes, architecturally, this house had done all the right things. Boxed in eaves, double pane metal frame windows, tile roof that's plugged, screen vents, the whole thing. And that was the cedar fire. This was a serious fire that came through here. So look at all those natives burning down the houses. This is in 2007. This is in the rangeland area of Ramona, and that is a wild grape. Hard to tell even if fire came through here, except for that incinerated Ficus benjamina next to the back door of the garage. And I want you to notice the overhead structure. It is masonry and steel. It is not wood. That's really an important feature to keep, from creating a fire ladder into the house. And this is a really serendipitous illustration of relative hydration. So in other words, that black smudge was once a ground cover rosemary. The shrub next to it was a native buckwheat that's blew in on the wind and would typically be modeled as a fire bomb. Well, this shrub was being watered, this slope was being watered by the homeowner once every 14 days in summer. This is out in Ramona, which is East County, very hot. And clearly the rosemary is incinerated. The native buckwheat still has green leaves on it, okay? So the hydration was not enough to sustain the rosemary, but clearly enough to sustain the natural native vegetation right next to it. So, yeah. And in this home, now again, I wouldn't put vegetation this close to a house, but because it was hydrated, it did not develop a lot of radiant heat. So if you look at the stucco, it's completely intact. It is not scorched, okay? We saw this over and over again. The natives on both sides of this person burned down, unfortunately. And this is the guy with the apron at the back there in a very hot fire. This is yet another one in rangeland and hydrated native vegetation. You can actually see the sprinkler head over here on the right. Again, did not develop enough heat and blocked enough embers and caught enough embers to not even burn that big giant redwood deck at the back of the house. We didn't build that. But I also say structurally, one of the things that helped save this home, also besides the hydrated vegetation, was the fascia boards are all hardy board. And another thing that's incredibly important is that cantilevered part of the deck is also closed off with hardy board. That's so supremely important. You don't want that fire getting up underneath the deck, okay? So there's a little bit of damage from random embers that came in, they put out. But again, this also created a completely defensible area for the firefighters to come in and fight the fire. And a lot of this green belt idea and everything, it's really to slow the fire down and allow firefighters to set up a perimeter and fight the fire safely at the edge of the community. These people don't have zone 2 to work with. And one other thing I want to point out is the goat pen at the base of the slope here. This thing went all the way out 60, 80 feet, and it certainly didn't slow that fire. So, these non-vegetated zones don't do anything other than like this platform up here providing a place to fight the fire from, okay? But here's the same property 3 years later. And this would have been this is the perfect before or after picture. That's how it looked. That's how it was. It completely recovered. None of the plants were lost. They're all happy and healthy and hydrated and doing their job. And I don't think it looks too ugly. Full of birds and butterflies. This is a fun one. This is in the Harris fire. This was also 2007. That's Lions Peak in the background there. So the Harris fire actually hit this property. It bifurcated, went around the edges, reconnected, and then went straight up Lions Peak. And there's a very famous video of it burning down the fire tower on top of there. All right. This fire did not encroach into in the least into this landscape because it was hydrated. It didn't even burn the mulch. Okay. Here's in the front yard, $100,000 solar array, about 6 to 10 feet of hydrated native vegetation, and then the unmodified natural chaparral beyond. Okay. So it literally went along the edges on both sides of this property and then rejoined up and went up Lions Peak. So, I mean, it doesn't get any starker than this. I had 2 properties in this fire, and both those homeowners called me the next day and said, Ruben, your landscape saved my house. That's a good call to get, let me tell you. Okay, so now we come to modern times. This is about 2 months ago. And this homeowner was using a flame torch to kill weeds because she didn't want to use Roundup. That's a whole nother presentation. Anyway, so I accidentally caught the mulch on fire. It just smoldered. She didn't even realize it was burned. She saw it. She goes, Greg, she couldn't wait to call me. Greg, the mulch acted exactly like you said it would. It just went out. And it was just like that fire marshal in Encinitas when he tested the mulch for you. And it couldn't sustain flame. I said, yeah, but Chrissy, it didn't go out, did it? Oh no, I didn't see any flames. I said, yeah, but you know, you need to put at least some water on it, or at least rake it away, the flame front away from the rest of the mulch. But anyway, the bottom line though is that this thing sort of smoldered with a very low flame height, didn't burn all the mulch, singed the plants, and the plants are fine. Even singed the bottom of the macadamia tree at the top of the slope. And at that point, it's burning leaves that help ignite. And then it hit the avocado tree at the upper right. And that's when the fire department showed up. And avocado leaves are one of the worst actors in fires. And these trees don't really know how to hold on to moisture like natives do. So they boil off. Actually, this thing is coming back now, but avocados are not fire resistant, let me tell you. But I want you to notice the manzanita right next to the right of the avocado has singed and scorched, but it did not burn. It is absolutely fine. And in fact, that area is getting covered in green leaves again. All right, guys, I told you I'd talk about what these people that cleared for 200 to 300 feet, what their outcome was, and it's not pretty. So you can clearly see it was cleared before the fire because there's no ash, right? And they absolutely destroyed pristine, gorgeous chaparral to do this. I'm sure the insurance company was pleased. And it's a pile of rubble with a chimney and some completely unburnt queen palms around it that are like pencils and do nothing to block flames. Okay. And this poor guy, I mean, incinerated, right? Here, these people, they did everything right. They cleared 200 to 300 feet around these homes. And the fire came from the direction that the photograph is being taken, not from that canyon. And gone. Even with green lawns and green vegetation, again, we've seen it over and over and over and over again. And things, thank God you guys are listening now. Thank God people are starting to get it. I just wanted to have a nice interlude here of what some of these fire resistant landscapes actually look like. This is a couple of pictures from La Jolla. I mean, they're gorgeous, right? If you design them right. Yeah, the only thing I'd be worried about in this photo is that eucalyptus right there. But even if the eucalyptus is there, if it's hydrated, it's been pruned up like this one has, and they're not allowing, the problem is all the debris, right, that collects under that oily, dusty, dirty, dried out debris. That's what causes the dwell times, causes the fire ladders. Okay, so I'm going to finish up here just with a discussion of at post fire, what to do. A lot of people in Altadena and Palisades had this situation where there's gullies coming down from the hills. And a lot of people would say, well, let's plant ryegrass there. Ryegrass is the worst possible thing you could ever do. It'll completely knock out the natural ecology, and you'll have horrible erosion and weeds and fire. Oh my gosh. So what do? Well, you get some T-posts and you stick them in across the gully, depending on the grade of that gully, maybe every 20 to 40 feet. And then you take those dead burnt branches and you weave them in between. But you leave enough space to let water come through, but hold back the debris. And that is a debris dam. Extremely effective post-fire. Most of what comes down is actually organic. They can be, if the site was healthy native ecology before, very little of that comes down. Very little of that dirt comes down. But if it was weedy and nasty, there's nothing to hold that soil. And you'll often see a lot of debris coming down in those situations. There are fungal partners in the soil. I won't elaborate, but they completely permeate the upper 3 feet of soil and glue it together. And those fungal partners are what really stabilize soils on a macro scale, and it is absent in weedy areas. Okay, here's another thing. Don't seed after fire. Duncan Hunter down here in San Diego, I got in a huge fight with him because he wanted to bring in 20,000 pounds of ryegrass seed, the absolutely most allelopathic, deadly native you could plant to native ecology. Well, they came in and aerial seeded these strips, and this is outside of San Luis Obispo, Cuesta Grade. And I understand that to this day, those bands are still visible. The native madrone, oak, manzanita woodland did not ever recolonize those areas where they had planted grass. Okay. And down here, down San Diego, this is sort of West Escondido here, or Lake Hodges. In spring, everybody runs out to Anza Borrego, our desert here, to see the desert wildflowers. But in our own backyard, this is what was going on, man. Because this was healthy prior to. This wasn't weeded over. And nature does a great job of recolonizing, right? I want to make a mention that the role of wildflowers is incredibly important to recovery. So I mentioned this mycorrhizal fungal grid that permeates the soil. Well, it stores water and metabolizes nutrients and basically helps feed these to the plants, and the plants return 20% of their carbohydrate production to the fungus. It's a true symbiosis. Well, when you have a fire, all that energy and moisture goes into those stump sprouts as those plants start to stump out back very quickly. So then comes the wildflowers, which are also tied into the fungus, and they replenish the grid. The rains and the carbohydrates from the wildflowers are what replenish the grid and get it ready again for the next fire. But unfortunately, if you have a situation like this that was seeded, that whole thing is short-circuited. Okay. This was seeded. There is no native ecology left. That oak tree in the back will be its next victim. It's ready to burn every year, and it's full of something called star thistle, which is really nasty. And it's a contaminant in a lot of these seed mixes, and you see it a lot in hay, horses or free-range grazing, but it's god awful, and people actually think this is a native landscape. Talk about desertification and loss of humidity and soil moisture. It's converting us into desert. So that's what it should look like, right? You'll even see glass on the ground, crunch, crunch, because the silica will often melt and form glasses, and that's fine. That's totally natural. Okay. Then this is 1 year post-fire, and the wildflowers are starting to come back. Things are beginning to stump sprout. And then 5 years post-fire, we've got a beautiful native garden returning on its own. And I'll end it there. There's my contact information if you guys want to reach out at all. We work all over San Diego County, and we have a pretty good track record of success and knowledge about this stuff. So that's the end. Thank you very much.
Hey, Greg, are you open to having people turn on their audio and have questions?
I am so completely open to that. That's what this is about.
Okay.
Please. Any questions? Anything in the chat to look at here? Oh boy, we have a lot of messages in the chat.
Greg, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Orchid.
Hi, Orchid.
Hi, and you've been talking for 28 years, and I've been listening to you for 25 of those years.
Absolutely have. I'm sure
we're
you had
having
a lot of clients out there in Altadena and stuff,
Yes, I do have clients in Altadena whose landscape did survive. 2 separate clients. So I'm pleased with myself around that. I want to
Proud of you.
thank you. Thank you. And actually 3 because I am also living within the footprint of the Eaton fire right now in Sierra Madre Canyon, and that Sierra Madre house that you saw, they now own all the houses around it, and that entire part survived. But I want to bring up this zone 0 thing because they're making regulations about this right now, and about 100 people were organizing, professionals, planners, UCLA, organizing around this regulation. And my experience is that our oak trees in our canyon, with oak trees touching everyone's house, I mean, no separation. And the sycamores were protected. Sierra Madre Canyon is still there. There's like 3 or 4 structures, 3 on the western edge and 1 on the other edge. So the edge wasn't a good place to be. But the floor of the canyon is basically Little Santa Anita Canyon. So one thing is, I would really love to have, this go up on YouTube sooner than later, because we're trying to get CMPS to take a position on Zone 0, and the people who live in Northern California are like, Zone 0 is the way, the truth, and the light. And those of us in Southern California who saw the, pines and oaks and deodars even sheltering houses from embers have a different view. Can you speak to that?
Oh boy, can I speak to that. So there is this sort of schism. We're trying to bridge this gap. So what happened is, we've been experiencing wind-driven fire for all of our lives down here. Santa Ana wind events. And so we've had a lot of experience. We took some good measures after the fires. One of the ones that I initially had heartburn over, but then grew to see the benefit as was SDG&E clearing around their power poles and transformers. I mean, I don't like to see native vegetation cut back, but in this case, I think it's really helped in other wind events, and also improving their connectors and stuff to keep sparking and arcing from lighting up vegetation. That's, knock wood, we haven't had a huge catastrophic fire like that since 2007. So we went through it. We went through the learning curve. We learned a lot. But a lot of what's happening in Northern California at this level is pretty recent. And so it feels like something of an certainly understandable, panicked, knee-jerk response. And they're blaming the vegetation. As I said, it's very performative, it's very easy. And what they're doing is potentially making the problem worse. When it comes to zone zero, I am of mixed feelings about that. So I typically am implementing it in new construction because it's easy to do then. It'll get the fire department off their back or the insurance company. And I actually think we have some instances where it actually worked. Okay. Having said that, to go in and retrofit and expect a senior citizen to remove a beautiful 50-year-old azalea that's growing next to the house or their privet hedge is at best ineffective and might even be counterproductive. You know, in those pictures I showed in Luca's and Max's article, clearly that house was protected by that hedge. Clearly, in the Greenbelt picture from Ramona I showed, that house was protected by those hydrated oak trees right next to it. And it's only scorched on the fire side. Okay. One of the things you saw, I'm sure you saw, Orchid, is that a lot of the scorched and burned vegetation was actually on the inside, on the house side, meaning that the house caught fire first and then ignited the vegetation from the house fire.
So true.
Okay, right? So,
Yes.
and what the bottom line in all this stuff, it's fairly, for the most part, independent of plant selection. I hate these stupid fire-resistant plants versus, banned plants list. They're terrible. There's no science supporting it. And it doesn't conform to our actual experience. And my experience goes back to my mentor at Las Felitas Nursery, Bert Wilson, may rest in peace, who was also a 14-year CAL FIRE firefighter. And so he'd been beating this stuff into my head since day one. Okay. So that's where I initially learned a lot of this stuff. And then putting it into practice, it played out beautifully. It played out pretty much as predicted. And we tweaked it a little bit. But after 25 fire events, and now you've mentioned 3, it's playing out, man. It's playing out. So I would think that person with their 50-year-old azalea against the house there, all I'd have them do is prune out some of the stuff it's growing up into the eaves or growing against the house, removing any dead vegetation, maybe thinning it out a little bit and enjoying it. And it may even help save the house, So that's kind of my stand. New construction, okay, I'll do zone 0. I think I've had some actually positive experiences with that. I'll retrofit if it's practical, but in general, I think it's way overblown, way overblown. The whole dependence on vegetative removal is way overblown. We need to be going from the house outward, not the landscape inward. Okay,
So thank you for speaking to that. And the head of I teach also at UCLA Extension for their horticulture and landscape architecture. And the head of my program, Stephanie Landrigan, said in an organizing meeting on Monday that they could potentially be asking us to remove 4 million trees. She just did some back of the envelope math on how many parcels are in the zones in their new map zones.
Yeah, this whole fire severity zone map is also wreaking havoc. I wish somebody would give me a call. I wish
I-
somebody bothered to watch my presentation. Regularly ask, okay, do we have any insurance representatives here? Do we have any firefighters here? Zilch, okay? Well, our properties are involved in major fire events and surviving. You want to hear what I have to say? I used to be an aerospace engineer. I also know about aerodynamics, right? I know about flows. I know about fluid dynamics and how wind behaves when it's perturbed by
Looks
an
like you have a
object.
bunch of other raised hands, so I'm gonna let you.
Well, it's so easy to blame the plants, right? Have them remove all the plants. Yeah, that's going to remove the fire danger. And then watch what happens. So I know there's a lot of questions in chat. I'm going to try to back up and maybe answer some. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to get through this. What about sages? Black sage, very successful. Okay, if hydrated. Yes, like the buckwheat, but it needs hydration and it needs to be cleaned out. You got to remove the dead wood, open it up. But yeah, some of your worst fire bombs actually benefit the most from the supplemental hydration. And know this, I cannot guarantee your home will not burn in a massive firestorm for reasons that have nothing to do with the landscape even, okay? But you sure can improve the situation and create real defensible space and hopefully save your house. Where join late, where's the exhibit? I'm not, that was, sorry, that was at the fair, San Diego County Fair. All right. Can you recommend anyone for product to replace an elevated wood deck? So the elevated wood decks, we're closing in the outside of them. That's one of the main things, using like hardy board, which are one of the other kind of fire resistant products. Most of the modern decking now, the composite decking is considered fire resistant. I know Trex and TimberTech have some good products out there. See somebody respond with the list. Thank you. Yeah, James Hardy products. Okay. I don't know. We can speak to the recording. I'm in NorCal and I find your message so right on. Experiential design is great practice. Thank you. And then we also did an actual scientific research. There's a lot of research out there, a lot. What do you do about wooden siding in addition to the zone 0? That's from Willie. And okay, dirty little secret, my house has cedar siding. So I just keep the wood stuff from away from the house. In general, though, most of the modern siding is no longer wood. It's either aluminum or it's like a hardy product, and those are real fire resistant. You can get radiant heat up against stucco and it'll burn the wall coverings on the inside. Check for cracks, loose boards, prevent ember intrusion, expensive, replace. Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. Hugo, landscape architect in Berkeley, zone 0, big issue. Yes. Lots of old historic houses with old established gardens. My thoughts. Well, again, it's site hygiene and maintenance, and I don't even remember if I mentioned this. Sorry if I'm repeating myself, but my research partner on the Navy project, Dr. John Keeley, used to own a home in Altadena, and it survived, and it was completely surrounded by hydrated trees. There's pictures from the Paradise Fire. I'm thinking of a specific instance where there was a mansion, large property that was completely surrounded. It looked like deodars, actually, but they're all hydrated. The home was completely intact in the Paradise Fire, but you look through the trees, utter and complete devastation. Okay. Does anybody know how they decided on zone zero? I don't know. They didn't call me, man. But you saw that we were already starting to implement that, and that was on Bert's advice back in the 90s, right? We were doing these aprons, these DG type things, not unattractive, right? Give you good access to the house, clean your windows and stuff, maintain. But again, I'm of a couple of minds on retrofits, and I think they're asking for too drastic a thing. When we're seeing these hedges right against the house, saving the damn house, touching the house. Okay, I had a client in the Pines fire. What was that? 98, 2000, up in Julian. That fire came, and this guy had mature manzanitas growing against his house, like a whole stand of these things. And even I was a little, oh, right? And the Pines fire came up from the canyon, hit that stand of lightly hydrated manzanitas. Again, we see this a lot. Bifurcates, burns down both neighbors, and keeps on going. All right. Manzanita against the eaves. Okay. I wouldn't recommend that, but clearly it really worked in this case. He was amazed even himself. He has a pretty intact home. Both neighbors are unfortunately rubble. Yeah. A lot of times, by the way, a lot of times these decisions are being made at a bureaucratic, political, managerial level. You go out and actually talk to real firefighters, and they'll pretty much confirm all this stuff. Oh yeah, that's how it really happens. So I hope that, you know, if there are any firefighters that attended this, let me know in the chat, because good on you. I really appreciate it, man. Zoom call on Monday, June 16th at 10 a.m. where Board of Forestry will talk about Zone Zero. Ruina, are you still online? Can you speak to
Yes,
that a
yes.
little?
Yeah, I'm a
That's
landscape
about.
architect, and I spoke to one of the fire departments, Los Altos Hills, because I'm working on a project in Los Altos Hills, and I was asking her about Zone 0, Zone 1, and wood fencing and all the material that you discussed today. And she said that the Board of Forestry is going to have a call on Monday, next Monday, and they're going to talk about Zone 0 and about fencing touching the house, wood fencing touching the house, and
That's a
how,
good one, actually. That's important.
yeah, so they're going to talk about cement walls and how they protect the house. And so I was planning to get on that call if I can.
Is there any way that I don't even know if I'm available on Monday,
Guys
but
down there?
is there any way I could potentially get
About
involved
down-
with that?
I'm
Yeah,
on
sure. I can
another
send you the
call.
link if I'm able to find the Zoom link. I can send
Oh,
it.
that would be great.
Yeah, yeah. I noted down your email address.
Yes, that's a good address.
So the one that you had on your presentation, right? Let me
Yeah.
see. Okay,
Please.
yeah,
Yeah, I
I will
appreciate
send
that.
you, I will send you the link. I'll look for it. Because I'm also
Thank
trying
you.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of contradictory information, from the fire safe departments, and then each county has a different plant list, and sometimes the plants that are on the list are not exactly drought tolerant. So, it's kind of difficult to use fire safe plants that are also drought tolerant. So that was my I talked to the fire department when I have questions. So this morning I had a call with the lady.
Well, I can tell you from experience that there's no such thing as a fire safe plant. Anything can burn. Most things can be hydrated to the point of adequate LFMC to be considered fire resistant. And so this holds for non-natives as well as natives. It's just the corollary that it takes so little supplemental water to actually hydrate a native plant. Plus, habitat, beauty, regional identity, erosion control, low maintenance, low water, all that stuff, right? and they're fun, right? And now they made them the boogeyman, and they're doing all the wrong things and completely exposing these houses to wind-driven fire. All this comes out of the modeling of fire as fuel-driven. And yes, occasionally we have fuel-driven fires, but they're very rare, usually up in the ridge lines where the forests are, and forest fires are a completely different animal, a completely different regime.
Mhm.
Okay, they're not typically wind-driven. They're usually thunderstorm started, and they usually go out very quickly on their own. All right.
Mhm.
I hate to do
But
this,
then when
but
Santa Ana winds or your offshore winds like they're experiencing up there more frequently, now we're off to the races.
I hate to do this, but we're gonna have to stop recording. It's been an absolutely wonderful presentation. I think I've learned more in this hour and a half than most others, for hours and hours. So
yeah.
thank you, Greg. It's been
This is a
absolutely
really crazy
wonderful. And thank everybody for attending, and check back into Small Firm Forum sometime if you want to see more of our presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, guys. It was a real honor and pleasure speaking to you, and I really appreciate the good turnout. And we're just trying to get the word out, especially in Northern California, man.
Yep.